us today. So be it.
So be it. Thank you, Jaycee. Thank you, Junia. Okay, so I decided to talk about Spiritism and prejudice today. I wanted to focus mostly on racism, although I have to be honest and say that I'm still learning. And especially, I think that's one of the reasons why I wanted to talk about this. And I don't face many of the forms of prejudice that most people face. I can only speak for my lack of privilege in the sense of sexism and from being an immigrant. But besides that, my life is pretty much easy, and I know I have many privileges. But I still wanted to take the opportunity of lecturing about it today, because today is the last day of Black History Month, which is February. And tomorrow is the first day of Women's History Month. So I thought it was a good day to have a discussion with you and to try to learn a little bit more for myself as well about prejudice, right? And what does Spiritism talk about it? Or how can we use Spiritism as a tool to fight against racism and other forms of prejudice, right? So I think that in face of everything the world is facing, not just the US, but everywhere around the globe, with so many problems regarding race, right? And so many things that we have seen that are really unjust, and people with reason feeling, so attacked. And then people in favor of immigrants and against immigrants, and people really grouping themselves and having this mentality of us versus them, right? So I think that everything we're facing, it's important that we discuss this and to try to understand what Spiritism, once again, can teach us about it. We also want to apologize in advance if I say anything that is not the best. I'm really trying my best intentions here. But as I said, there are many things I don't know. And so I'm just really trying to understand more about that. And so the first thing was to go after, what does prejudice mean, right? And prejudice is a preconceived judgment or opinion, or an adverse opinion or learning formed without just grounds or before sufficient knowledge. An instance of such judgment or opinion, and an irrational attitude of hostility directed against an individual, a group, a race, or their supposed characteristics. And I like to think about myself as a person with no prejudice. I used to think that way. Now I know that is definitely not true. There are things that I definitely bring, and I have to be honest, especially regarding like religious groups and other groups. And this is something that I'm trying to fight in myself, right? So trying to educate myself and do better. And if we look at this opinion, it's very rare that a person does not have any prejudice. It's really rare for you to look at someone and make no judgment, either based on how they look or a type of ethnicity they are or the group they are. Usually you make some pre-assumptions. And this is most of the time something that is not helpful, right? And something that's going to make us more judgmental and less open to get close to that person many times, right? Instead of trying to know them before making any judgments. And so how does prejudice start? I was reading an article saying that they are doing some research and they're learning that kids as young as in kindergarten, they already start to internalize some racist ideas. And this prejudice starts by us grouping people into different categories or different groups, right? So either group them in this religious group or this ethnic group or this cultural group. So any type of grouping that we do with people where we separate people and we assume a posture of us and them, or usually us are the right one and the others are the ones that are wrong, right? Doesn't matter what we're talking about. And in the Spiritist point of view, where is this coming from, right? Why are we grouping people into categories, and why are we thinking that when we group people, we are always in the best group, like our group is better? And that's because of what it's mentioned in Spiritism about ego and pride, right? So as the spirits say, pride and vanity in the Spirit's book, they are the true source of humanity. And that's exactly what prejudice is. You are being so proud and so vain that you're judging that whatever characteristics make you different also makes you better, right? And we tend to do that, and most people think that way about themselves, right? And especially people who are privileged, so they are in groups of privilege. And I know I've many people, and when you talk about minorities, I hear many people saying, well, but that's not really a minority. If you have less white people, now white people who are a minority. This is not really right, because when you're talking about minority, it's not just the number of people in the group, but it's also the power that they have in the society, and how many policies in our society, how many laws privilege them in relationship to the other groups. So that's when we talk about a minority, we're talking about groups that are less privileged than the others, right? And this is, I think I like this cartoon a lot because it does summarize what this mentality of prejudice stands for, which is our blessed homeland and their barbarous wastes, right? So if you look at them, they're exactly the same, but that's what people think. You tend to think at everything that is our much better, like our great religion and their primitive superstition, and our noble populace and their backward savages, or our heroic adventures and their invaders. And so we tend to do that, right? Or like we are the peacemakers and they are the ones causing war. So we tend to see everything that other people do in as worse than what. And what are some forms of prejudice or some forms of discrimination? There are many. I think probably the most important ones to talk about today is racism, but that is also sexism. That is a big problem. And I think that people usually talk about like the white male, because it is really hard for a white male that is heterosexual to understand, especially if they are rich, to understand discrimination and how much it impacts a person, because they are not in any unprivileged group, right? So they really don't understand much of that. And we also have anti-LGBT prejudice. They say that homophobia is not a word that should be used anymore, because it's not that people are afraid of LGBT people. They are just, it's different, right? It's prejudice. It's not like being afraid, and phobia means being afraid.
They're just against it, right, Nachi?
Oh, I'm sorry, Natasha, can you say that again?
I said that some people are just against LGBT
Exactly, yes. They're
right.
just against, they think it is something that is not right, or people shouldn't be that,
Exactly.
right? And I don't even understand how somebody could be bothered by who somebody else loves if they're not hurting anyone, but people are still growing and evolving, so that's maybe a step. But economical discrimination is another form. Some people really are prejudiced against poor people, or maybe sometimes you have poor people who have prejudice against rich people and they assume they're all, bad. Cultural discrimination. For cultural discrimination, I'd like to point, we're from Brazil, right? And we have all these differences. Brazil is such a big country, and we have so many cultural differences in Brazil itself, that there are a lot of cultural prejudice in Brazil, where people tend to group people as well and say, oh, if they're from that area, they're going to behave that way, right? There is religious prejudice and body prejudice in the sense of based on disability, and environmental injustice. I put environmental injustice in there because minorities are disproportionately more affected by environmental issues, although they are not the ones that cause more environmental problems. So pollution is usually being caused by people in power and more rich countries, developed countries in general. I could talk a lot about environmental injustice, but I'm going to skip this for now, maybe for another lecture. And then people are probably going to say, well, it is getting better. I'm not denying that. And we should be very glad that really humanity is improving. But I want to point to why should we still talk about this, right? Why it is important that we still do our part and try to educate ourselves when talking about racism and prejudice in the world. One point is that we still, or most people still depict Jesus as being a white, blue-eye, blonde male, where in fact he was a person of color, right? He was probably brown, and it's just, this is showing already in religion, right? A little bit of racism as well. So in some point of history, he became white, right? Not Jesus himself, but the idea of Jesus, and that somehow probably to show that he was more pure. I don't know, right? What is the point behind it? But that was the European vision of Jesus, because they wanted Jesus to be like them. And here are some data showing that there are, although it is getting better, there's still a lot of racism in the world, and this is just showing some numbers. So you have Black members of the Congress over time, and you can see that it didn't really improve that much. So if you compare with the total number, which is 535, the orange bars on the first graph here are showing how many Black Congress people we have in there, and that's less than 50. Okay? So it is less than 10%. And this is showing like per capita income, and then advanced course credit earned in secondary school. I can talk a little bit more about that because I teach AP Science now. And really, unfortunately, it is very rare. If you see here like the difference, there are many more white students taking AP courses than Black students. This is the number of work into the next year to earn as much as white men. And then you see here white men, they work, like if they work the full year. You have white women who could stop in April working. So even though you can see the sexism right here, but in August, Black women have to work 226 days more to earn the same salary. And Hispanic women is more than 300 days more. So this is just showing some data to show how different life is, right, for these different groups. This is also showing the denial rates for home loan applications. So it is harder for people of color to get a home loan as well. And much, like the difference is very large. This is sentenced prisoners by race. And you can see here the immense difference between Black and white and Hispanic. And on dark green, you can see the share of prisoners. And on light green, you can see what is the share of the overall population. So although white make up 60% of the population in the US, 39%, which is most of the prisoners, are Black. I'm sorry, 33%. And then you probably say, okay, but maybe they commit more crimes, right? I don't know, maybe that's why. And then here is showing marijuana used versus possession arrests by race. So there are some laws that they have a thin line, and then it is up to the judge to decide if they're going to send the person to jail or not. And this is one example. So marijuana, which is weed possession, right? And in some states it is still illegal. And then you can see here showing possessions arrest in 2018, right? Rates for 100,000. It is so Black people are more than 3 times more arrested by marijuana possession than white people. And then if you look at usage, you can see this is showing the usage on the left. It is almost the same, with Black people just using like 1% more or 1.5% more. So it's not that they are using more drugs, they're just getting more arrested, right? And then this other one is showing fatal police shootings per million by race as well, with Black and Hispanic in the lead here. And this is part of what has been bringing up this important discussion, right? This important protest that have been coming on about Black Lives Matter and about injustice in our system. And I know all of this is very uncomfortable. It is uncomfortable for me too, because we tend to not recognize our own privilege, right? It's much easier because of, once again, pride and vanity. It's easier to think, oh, you know, I have what I have, or I'm not in jail or anything because I am a better person, or, you know, I know my qualities. But can we recognize how many privileges we have? Do you know what would happen if we were in the same situation? So I don't know if you ever seen that. I did that when I went to college here. It's called like the privilege walk. And it is a very important exercise to analyze privilege, where everybody starts at the same line. So you take a class, everybody starts at the same line, and then you ask people a couple of questions. And then you say, oh, if you can express your faith without nobody looking at you in a weird way, you can take one step forward. And then people keep moving on or not. And then they say, if you can express your love for your partner without fear of being called out or being beaten on the street, take a step forward. And then people keep moving. And at the end, what you see, and when I did that, it was with my college group, I remember it was very sad, because some people were so far away from others that the male, usually the white male that were in the front, they would look and they couldn't hear. We cannot talk with the people who were in the back anymore because we were so far away. And there were many of these questions. There were things like, if you had both of your parents in your house, if you didn't have to skip a meal because you didn't have food. So things that sometimes we take for granted, right? And then you see that so many people are suffering. And we don't recognize that we have these privileges because everybody has their own struggles. So we tend to see our struggles as worse. Like everything you overcome is like, it makes you special, right? That's how we tend just to see the outcome, right? Oh, this person did this wrong act. And another problem is that we tend to generalize, right? So I have been reading, that's part as well as why I wanted to talk about this today, is this, I have been reading this book that is called How to Be an Anti-Racist. And we have been reading it for school, like not all the teachers, but we are in a book club and we could choose to read the book. And we're having this very uncomfortable discussions in between the teachers because we're trying to understand our own biases. And we notice a lot of difference as well in in the different races and the different ethnicities. What happens with the students in terms of grades, and also in terms of getting in trouble, right? Of getting like references to the administration, and the numbers are very different. And so we're trying to understand if teachers, we also have a bias, right? And how can we get better? So by reading this book, I definitely recommend it. It is not an easy read because he's African-American, and then he talks about his own journey in discovering himself as having many racist ideas as well. And he states that a person is either racist or anti-racist, or ideas and policies are either racist or they are anti-racist. It's not really anything in between. And we like thinking about we are somewhere in between. Like, oh, I know I did something, but it was not that wrong, right? Maybe I thought about something when I saw somebody crossing the street, right? They were from a different race. So maybe I was scared and I just thought, oh, but I'm not being racist. This is just something in between, right? This would be an anti-racist behavior. I'm sorry, a racist behavior on my part, right? And what I like about him is that although he points out and he really touches all the wounds, he points out to the fact that it's not that every time like, oh, this person is racist or this person is anti-racist. We're trying to be anti-racist, but we still have sometimes racist behaviors and racist ideas, right? And he talks about policies as well and how that's very important. So he separates racist into segregationists, which are really people that believe that all the races should be separate, that we should not have a mix, and that some races are much better than others. And assimilationists, which are just people or ideas, they're racist, but they are not, they don't want to separate groups. They just want to get some cultural ideas that they think are better and to pass this to the other groups. Okay? So this is just, okay, like we're a little better than others. So, let's just teach them our way. Pretty much that's what it is. And then anti-racist, which when ideas that know that people are all the same, that we're all the same, there are no biological differences, and that the behavior of one person is just the behavior of one person. You cannot generalize the behavior of one person to a whole race. And he talks about that when he was in school. He noticed that anytime he did something bad as a student, he said, I was a bad student. But in the vision of my teachers and everybody else, I was a bad Black student, he said. And if a white student was a bad student, he was just a bad student, right? Nobody would say, okay, because all white students are bad. And I think that's an important point, to see behavior as just what it is, right? Behavior is from a person, it's not from a group, right? And then I want to address, I don't know if you ever heard about that. I didn't really heard about that before this lecture, so I did some researching this week. And there were some comments from Kardak. They were a little racist. I'm not going to talk much about them, but one is in Genesis, and the other one is on the Spiritism magazine from 1862. I didn't bring it up because I don't think something that we should be talking a lot about. I want to point out that Kardak was, let's say, inspired in that time by what the science believed, and science is always changing, right? And science believed there was a huge difference between the different races. And he talks about this in this part where it is necessary to consider the Black, Mongolian, and Caucasian races as having each its own particular origin. And I want to point out to this wrong. Scientifically speaking, no, this is not correct. We all have the same origin, and we all originated in Africa. That's where humans originated. And Kardak himself, he said that we should keep learning, right? And that we should not deny science. So this is important to bring up, right? And we have to try to consider the mentality of the time and what people believed in. But Kardak was also an absolutionist, so he believed that slavery was very wrong. And there are many, many points in the Spirit's book and on the gospel that talk about equality in the sight of God. And I want to bring that up. And I really think that's what we should focus on everything that Spiritism teaches about we're all equal in the sight of God, right? And that's question 803. Where that's what Kardak asks, right? Are all men equal in the sight of God? And the Spirit's answer, yes. All tend towards the same goal, and God has made his laws for the equal good of all. You often say, the sun shines for all, and in saying this, you enunciate a truth much broader and of more general application than you think. And why is prejudice wrong? So now in biology, people really used to believe that race was a biological characteristic. It is not. Race is an illusion. We tend to separate people by their color. When we're talking about race, it's usually like skin color and hair color or texture. But biologically speaking, that is not a single gene that can differentiate between a race and the other. So what does it mean? If you take everybody from the white, from the white race and everybody from the Black race, and you look at their genes, you're not going to find one that all Black people have and all white people don't. So that is not a single identifier. It is much more complex than this. Skin color is related to geographical latitude. Now we know that. So the closer to the equator a population is, the more, the darker the skin. And it's very complex to talk about all of this in here, but I have this, if you're interested in learning more, I recommend this Harvard article that talks about how science and genetics are reshaping the race debate of the 21st century. So nowadays, scientists, they're not trying to use the concept race anymore. They talk about ancestrality, and you can talk about ancestors and ethnicity maybe, but race is really not a good biological concept because it is not based in biology. And then what about Spiritism, right? Why is prejudice so wrong, and why should we fight against it? Well, I brought a couple of points, right? We're all the same. We know that all spirits are created simple and ignorant, and that we are all evolving. We're all under God's law of evolution, right? We reincarnate in different conditions as well when we need to learn different lessons. So we may be, we may be from a particular group now, and we're going to come in another group. Maybe now we're very well economically speaking, and then we're going to reincarnate poor. But we know that the souls, right, the spirits, they're all the same, and it doesn't matter. Like, this is just the body we're wearing at this moment in time. And so all of this in Spiritism, it's bringing up to the point that prejudice doesn't make any sense, right? We also bring up that in Spiritism, we always say how it is rationalized faith. So we have to rationalize everything, including our own biases and the problems going on in the world. And this is something else that I got from the Spirit's book, where they say it is not the blood that is more or less pure, but only the spirit. Right? So I think that's a very good point and summary here. And if you look at the gospel, the part where they describe what a good person is, it's called the good person, o homem de bem. They talk about how the good person always sacrifice their own interest in the name of justice. So I think in this case, that's a call for action. We saw Jesus doing that many times in his time, where he stood up for people who were weaker and for the poor, and for people who were being discriminalized, right? So we should also do the same, because we should follow his footsteps, his example. The good person is always good, humane, and benevolent with everyone. Created because they see all men and women as brothers and sisters. That's what we're aiming for, right? Charity guides them in every circumstance, because they know that those who prejudice others with evil words, who injure others with their pride by disregarding their susceptibilities, lack the obligation to love one's neighbor, and so do not deserve the clemency of the Lord. And I just thought that some passages of Jesus, or some parables that he brought, they talk about that. I think the parable of the Good Samaritan, where he talks about first the Jew priest came first and left the man on the road, didn't do anything. And then a second person came. And then when the Samaritan, who were considered inferior back then, he passed through the road and he helped the man, he gave him water, he took him to safety. And I think that it's a good passage. Jesus was trying to teach us, it doesn't matter what group you're from. It matters what you carry in your heart and the good that you do to other people. That's the only thing we should be focusing on. Also, the first stone passage, where Jesus, the woman is being treated unfairly because she was considered like she betrayed the husband, right? And they're going to cast stones in her. And he said, who is without sin, cast the first stone. So he was putting that woman in the same level as the man. Like, we have to look at ourselves, right? So Jesus only showed us love. And unfortunately, people change his teachings. And like, I think we can take anything and try to find a reason, or try to find as a justification for our wrong acts. And unfortunately, many people sometimes take Jesus' teachings and say that, use them to be prejudiced against other people, right? But the only thing that he taught us was love and forgiveness, right? So just to remember, he says that the most important commandment, the first one is love God, but the second one is love one another as I have loved you. It's the only thing he tells us, right? Jesus also was a protester in the sense that he challenged the status quo many times. When he took all that money changers from the temple, and he said they could not be charging in there. He was also frequently healing on the Sabbath, and this is for many seen as protest because Jews were not supposed to work on the Sabbath, and he would heal on the Sabbath, and they say that was just to show that caring for people was more important than any type of not really cultural ideas, but of establishments that people did, right? So caring and loving people was more important than anything else, than not working on the Sabbath, for example. And just trying to summarize here some of the points for why should we do better, or why should we be an anti-racist. Well, so let's remember, right, according to Spiritism and what we believe, we're either in this position before, so we were in one of the groups that created problems. Maybe we were slave owners, right? We don't know. Maybe we contributed to the problem in the past. We are most probably going to be in this position in the future. So if we're now, a male, maybe we're going to be a female in another incarnation. Maybe we're going to be an African-American person. So we are going to be in somebody else's shoes. It is also our only path to evolution, because being an anti-racist means that you love everybody the same, right? And we know that that's the only way to follow Jesus, because that's exactly what he taught us. So what is good about the How to Be an Anti-Racist book as well is that he brings good news. He says that racists and anti-racists are not fixed identities, like, oh, this person is a racist, so they're not going to change. He said this is not true. And we are, as humans, much more complex than that, right? We are not either racist or anti-racist. We are just, sometimes we have racist ideas or racist behaviors, but we can all change little by little, right? In overcoming racism, and this is also true for other forms of prejudice, they are an ongoing struggle, and it is uncomfortable because we have to face our own problems and our own prejudice, and it is necessary, right? Okay, so how can we do that? How can we become an anti-racist? How can we change? How can we try to improve? First thing is recognize. So try not to be defensive. That's what I do. I remember once I was called a racist by a student, and the first thing you become defensive. You're like, what? I'm not. Like, that doesn't make any sense. But you have to just stop in and try to understand why they're saying that, right? Validate that talk and try to understand what's going on. How can you do better, right? So recognize is the first step. Recognize when you have a racist idea. Second one would be empathize. So you put yourselves in other people's shoes, right? This is also the golden rule. And then the third step would be to broaden. So you try to build relationships with people that don't look like you. So people from other groups, people that you usually don't interact much with, right? And then the last one is always be inspired by Jesus, right? So act on change. Try to act to change the system that favors prejudice and stand up against injustice. So when we see something that is going on, if we are in a position where we're safe and we can help, try to stand up, right, and help that person. I've seen with all this police brutality problems against people of color, that many people there are that have a privilege in the sense, like white people, one thing they're doing is, if they see this going on, they start recording or talking to the police. That's at least the first step. If it is safe to do so, try to stand up if you see something unjust going on. And what else did Jesus do? So he questioned injustice, right? He questioned hypocrisy. He was always on the side of the poor and the oppressed. That's who he walked with. That's who he went and he provided his teachings to. And he prayed at the last moment when he was on the cross. He prayed for the unity of his followers and that they would be one and would love one another just as he and the Father are one as well. So our main goal is to change that mentality of us versus them and try to see the we, right? Instead of seeing what makes us different, see what makes us the same, what makes us equal. We're all spirits, we're all trying to evolve. We all have our struggles, although the struggles are different, and we have to recognize that many people struggle more than we do because they have less privilege. But we are, you can try to find commonalities instead of seeing differences. You can try to think about how maybe you and that person, you both have a family that you care for. Maybe you both maybe you are both passionate by the same cause, right? You don't have to look like other people to have commonalities with them. And I just want to finish with the story. I thought it was very inspiring. I was looking for a story of somebody who was a racist and who changed. And I found this person, he's called Derek Black. And I read a lot about him yesterday. And I'm going to try to summarize here. But he was born from a person who was a white supremacist. And he created a website that I don't even record the name of it. I wouldn't say it either. But this website is a website for white supremacists, and they just go there and they talk and they exchange ideas and they talk bad about other races and other groups and religions. And this was his dad. And then his dad got married with a woman who was his mom, who was also coming from a family that was well known in this white supremacist world. And then when he was born, they used to say that he was like the heir of the white supremacy. So he grew up in this whole idea of the white race was superior. But he said he was always against violence. He was always against violence. But he even had a column that he would write on this website, and he had a radio show every morning with his father. And then he decided to study history because he wanted to learn more about it. And he went to a college that was multicultural college in Florida. And he said that people were, first they made fun of him, but he decided to go either way. And when he arrived there, he decided not to talk about who he was because he didn't want people to not like him at first. And so he would have his right in college, he started having friends and everything, but he was still having his radio show talking about his ideas with his father every day, and he would do that in hiding. But then somebody in the university discovered who he was, and they published in a group of the university, and then everybody knew about it, and people stopped talking to him. But in this university message group, they started talking about it, and somebody said, hey, we have an important mission here. Somebody said, somebody should come up with an idea on how to reach him, because isolating him is not going to do anything. It's not going to change him. We have to do something better. Then there was one guy that was an Orthodox Jew, and the only one in the whole university. And he would have, every Friday night, he would host dinners, and he would invite a lot of different people, because he was the only one celebrated that, but he thought it was important to include people from different groups. And he started inviting, and he invited him. Derek said that he thought about not going, but it was the only social invitation he got in many months, because people were not talking to him because they were, of course, upset. And then he decided to go. And he also, in his show, he would talk bad about Jew people, because he said that Jewish they were not white, and whatever more, they should go back to their country, these things like this. But he decided to go, and he became friends with with the Jewish student that was called Matthew. And they, like, both of them knew about each other's past, but they eventually started liking each other. And every Friday he started going, and other students that used to go stopped going because of him. But with time, people started getting more and more accustomed and familiar with him, and saw that he was not that bad. And throughout college, through the many years that came, he started changing his mind, and he would discuss with everybody that would come, and many immigrant students as well. And he started learning from them until one point when he finished college, he was going to do his master's. And then his friend said, hey, I think it's time that you break up with this movement, right? And then he published a letter saying that he could not support the movement anymore because it was telling him that he could not be a friend to whomever he reached and with person of other races, and that his actions have been harmful to people of color, and that he was striving for an opportunity and fairness to all, and that he was very sorry for the damage he has done. And after that, he said that he was very scared to do that at first because he didn't know how his family would react. And his mother and sisters didn't really want to see him. And he said that it looks like until today, this was, I don't remember how many years ago, I think 5, but they don't really talk to him anymore, very, very briefly. And the only person in his family that still tries to contact him sometimes is his father, who is still with the website and everything, but they are frequently talking. And I thought it was a great example on how someone who was raised his whole life, you know, to have these racist ideas, how he was able to overcome that when he was faced with reality. And reality is that other people are important, right? Other people are amazing as well, and that you have to open up yourself and know other people. You cannot judge people without knowing them. And nowadays he advocates for anti-racism, and he says that he understands how diversity is important, and it's actually the opposite. He's in favor of immigration, and he thinks that it is a great thing. So I think that was very inspiring, his story and how he overcame all those ideas that he grew up with. And I wanted to finish with that as an inspiration for us, because, you know, if somebody like this can change, we can change our little prejudices, right, that we carry within us. Okay, folks, that's it. I'm sorry, I think I passed a couple of minutes over.